This is another very interesting picture, and very original. One of the things I should mention is in the Renaissance, particularly in the 16th century, one of the things that was so important, at least in art theory, was the idea of invenzione, invention. We would probably translate that as originality, that an artist wasn't just copying, and Sofonisba does copy her master's things, everybody did, but she also does things that are really unique inventions, such as the self-portrait within a portrait that you just saw. And here's another one that's quite interesting. It's called Number of Things. Whenever we give titles in the Renaissance, the artists don't usually give titles. It's the subject of the work. So her sisters playing chess, 3 sisters playing chess, the chess game. They're called various things. It is dated, and this was in the exhibit that they had of Italian Renaissance and Baroque women artists at the National Museum of the Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., so I was able to see it. And one of the things that really stood out, I was not able to photograph it, though. They don't allow you to do that, which I really wish I could have, because I'd love to have shown you details of it. I was, I can't really say I was amazed, but I marveled at the detail that is in the picture. It's very, very precise detail in the foreground. And the background, then, of course, is this very atmospheric, almost Layard-esque landscape. So she's showing that she has various techniques and skills. This is a portrait of the artist's sisters. They're playing their chess game. In the background, we see the governess, who seems to be the same woman, only a little bit younger than we saw in the picture that I showed you before with Sofonisba playing on the virginals on the spinet, probably dating around 1559. Now, we don't know the date of that other picture. It might even be later, because it looks to me like the woman was more than 4 years older. But it probably is the same woman. She seems to be dressed in the same fashion, has very similar features. And it is suggested that this might have been their nurse, who became their governess, who became was their chaperone. And as we said before, having a chaperone there tells us immediately that these are virtuous, noble girls. They're not going to run around and do anything untoward. They are controlled, as women should be controlled, would have been the thought of the time, certainly. Now, this isn't the first time somebody portrayed a chess game. Actually, there is a classical vase, as I recall, of, I think it's Ajax playing an ancestor of chess in an ancient Greek vase. But the more immediate subject, because I doubt that she ever saw that, the more immediate painting that might have inspired this, or the way a chess game might be shown in the Renaissance, was by Giulio Campi, who is possibly a distant relative of Bernardino. But there's a chess player's game. We don't know if Sofonisba ever saw it. And you can see that the interpretation is totally different. Who is playing it? What the meaning of the picture is. In Giulio Campi's game, there's a sort of sexual innuendo here. You've got this woman who is playing with even an armored man. She's playing with these different men. There's flowers out there, little figures. You're not quite sure. Is this supposed to be in a tavern, or is it a brothel? Which is a possibility, certainly. A high-class one where they don't just do the deed, but they also entertain the customers. Not quite sure. I'm not quite sure anyway. But certainly there is some kind of idea here of this woman among the men playing. And as I say, there's sexual innuendo in that. When Sofonisba paints it, there isn't. It's a new interpretation, it's a different interpretation, and there's multiple levels of looking at this work of art. It really becomes a new type of portrait. And that idea of invenzione, I got ahead of myself, I guess. The idea of invenzione, which is so important if you're going to be a major Renaissance artist, you need to have originality. So there's some things that's really unusual about this. You don't usually see portraits of three noble daughters without their parents, but we have a chaperone, so we know they're okay. It's unusual to have a group portrait in a landscape. It's not unheard of, but usually if you were having a family portrait with your children, think about Almacari's portrait with Minerva and Asdrubale, it's inside their palace, their palazzo, and you can see a view outside. But here we have it's almost like they've gone outside and they're under a tree and enjoying the fresh air. I suppose they could be on a loggia, but it looks like they're in a landscape. What is really interesting, of course, is the idea of combining a genre picture, a picture of everyday activities, which become very, very popular in the 17th century. There are genre paintings before then. There's some 16th century, especially in Flanders. But that's when it becomes extremely important. So this, in a sense, anticipates 17th century genre painting. But it also is a portrait, so it's several levels. And there is this interesting thing about they're not just sitting there, they're doing something, which makes it an active group portrait. Geez, when I'm lecturing on active group portraits in my survey class, I'm lecturing on Rembrandt. So once again, there is something quite innovative about the way she's showing a kind of narrative interaction. We want to make it the story. We want to say, what are they thinking? What are they doing? Lucia is making her move, but she's looking out at us, drawing us in. Minerva has raised up her hand. Has she drawn her hand away from a piece, or is she ready to put it down and grab the next piece and move it, or is she in amazement or dismay or whatever Lucia's move is? We don't know, But there's something going on there. And then there's the young Europa, and she's smiling. And remember, Sofonisba sends a smiling girl picture to Michelangelo a few years before. I still think that smiling people are harder to paint than weeping or solemn people. And in fact, I'm going to remind you of another portrait that you've seen, and I don't want to make too close a connection here, but from survey class, from just general knowledge, you probably know of Leonardo's Mona Lisa. People love to talk about the smile there, and the reason is because we want to know what she's thinking, and we think that the Mona Lisa is thinking something, but we don't know what it is. And here, we can make up some stories, but there is maybe not as subtle as Leonardo's picture, but certainly there is that idea of, they're doing something, they're thinking something, and we want to know about it. We'd like to, figure out the narrative. And I did mention the very soft atmospheric landscape. I called it Leonardesque. And of course, Leonardo worked in North Italy at the court of Milan for some time. Now, besides our picture where we weren't quite sure of the virtue of the people being portrayed in Campi's chess game, chess was an intellectual game which both men and women could play. It was acceptable for noble ladies because there was no betting involved. Women should not be betting. Puts them in a very invidious position. And one of the interesting things is the game of chess had changed. And one of the changes that had been made was that in the 16th century and onward, the queen had become the most powerful piece. She could move any way. She could transform things. So it has been suggested that idea of the queen, the female piece, essentially, somehow is a parallel to the young ladies who also are female and have their own abilities or powers. As I said, when I saw this picture, the detail of the garments and the rug that's over the table, people didn't really usually put rugs on the floor. They're too valuable, but they often would be over a table here. And if you're not, you wouldn't eat on the rug. You'd move it off. But playing the game would be perfectly nice. So you have this wonderful patterns and textures. And I've already mentioned the landscape. I've also mentioned that it anticipates the 17th century genre paintings and active group portraits. Genre means type, but when we talk about genre painting, it's come to mean paintings of everyday people doing everyday things. Here it's noble people doing an everyday activity. So, this is one of the earliest paintings this is the earliest painting that has a date on it. You know, we were saying that we're trying to date things from the age of Asdrubali or the age of Sofonisba. This painting and some of the other paintings, so the picture we just looked at, the chess game, has a date on it of 1555. This picture, however, the portrait of a nun, is the earliest dated painting by Sofonisba Anguissola. Traditionally, it was thought to be a portrait of her sister Elena, which makes perfect sense because Elena became a nun. And so it just seemed like a nice logical thing. She's painting family members, so this presumably is her second sister, her next younger sister. However, recently people have started to rethink that and said, it might not be. There is an inscription on it. Some of the letters are missing. They get rubbed off or braided or something. But the inscription may refer to a different convent than the convent that the sister entered. It looks like it might be an abbreviation for the Monasteria Santi Augustini. And it's also pointed out that the habit is the habit of Augustinian novices. So this may have been a portrait of somebody else who was entering the Augustinian convent. When she's entering as a novice, her parents perhaps, have her portrayed. So they have something to remember her by when she's not there. Some of these are very, very subtle. You look at this, it's a very simple picture, and then you realize how sophisticated it is in a very subtle way to have the different white colors. Those of you who are art majors may be aware of the 20th century painting by Malevich called White on White. And in the 19th century, Sargent was known for painting different shades of white, which is considered to be quite a accomplishment. So we have that. The background is a green background, contrast to the white habit, and then there's touches of warmer color. The prayer book is red. It has these ribbons hanging down, which we use to mark different places in the prayer book. And then, of course, the face has a kind of warm glow to it. So you have this, very subtle light, geometry of forms. This painting and several of her other paintings have been compared to Lorenzo Lotto. I know that not everybody knows Lotto. Lotto is one of the most remarkably wonderful painters of the 16th century. And he does the most fantastic portraits as well as religious figures. I always feel like he has the best of both worlds. We'll have these very wonderfully planned compositions, and yet there's something a little bit informal about them. And his color is fantastic. And he always comes up with poses that you don't expect. He does really wonderful portraits. So just to me, when I've seen this and a few others, that may be one of the connections I think of. It may not be for you. This painting is fairly near at hand. It's in the United States. It is a portrait. It's in the Baltimore and the Walters Art Gallery, and it is a portrait of Maximiliano Stampi. It is dated, and as you can see, you have this young boy who's 9 years old, dressed up like an adult, and this would be normal. Aristocratic children were dressed like aristocratic adults. They have a position to maintain as well. They didn't do what we do today, is have, real easy clothing for children, and then maybe when you have to put on your business suit and go to work, wearing something different. That wasn't the way they saw it in former eras. So, he's dressed very, very elegantly, and he is in a fashionable costume. He's holding his gloves. He is leaning against a column, and he has his dog curled up at his feet. Some of these accoutrements, as it were, holding the gloves, wearing a very fine aristocratic costume. Black was fashionable. It may also be for mourning. And having the column nearby, or suggesting that idea of the aristocrat in his setting. And yet, you look at that face, and it's a little boy who is trying to be grown up. There's a vulnerability about it, which he has brought off beautifully. And he's 9 years old. He has just inherited the title of Marquess of Soncino, which was his father's title. His father has died. And so now he is the head of the family. He is the young Marquis, and he has adult responsibilities, as it were. This is another one of Sofonisba's portraits of Isabella of Valois, the Queen of Spain. And here you see her full-length figure. She's holding a miniature. I wish I had a detail of this, but I don't. She's holding a miniature of her husband, Philip II. And this may just be because, it's supposed to show the connection between her and her husband. She wants to have him by her, even when he's not present. It's also been suggested that it signifies that she stands in for him. Women were not always allowed to do business for their husbands, but certain husbands gave certain wives what we might call power of attorney. And as a queen, she would be performing diplomatic functions, and might be standing in for him on some occasions. This portrait in Berlin, it has been suggested that it is a portrait of Bianca Ponzone Anguissola. Now, we're not quite sure because it does not have an inscription on it, but it is definitely a portrait of a noblewoman. And it has been suggested that it is indeed the mother of Sofonisba and the wife of Almacari. He married twice, and both of the wives were named Bianca, so it was a little confusing, I think. One of the reasons is because they have another portrait by that appears to be possibly the same person, but it's painted by Lucia, and they're wearing the same necklace. And the other one is thought to be her mother. And so, by extension, once again, neither of these is certain. We're not sure that is the portrait of her mother, but it may be. And the Ponzone family was an important noble family from Cremona. So, Almacari did marry into the noble local families. And once again, there's the interest in the structure of the face. But also in the clothing details, which is something that, as an aristocratic portrait painter, the sitters would be very interested in seeing. She painted portraits of other people at the court, and here I had a picture of one of the children. And I've still been trying to figure out if that's supposed to be a little boy or if it's supposed to be a dwarf, and I don't know. Don't know much about that portrait. This is another picture that I have seen, and at first I thought, boy, how very unusual for Sofonisba. It's a very late picture. It's signed and dated 1592, and it is a fairly large religious painting. It is the Holy Family with Saint Anne and Saint John, and a little dog in the corner. I put up a couple of words, emotional warmth. I think you can see that, the very loving, tender relationship with the family. Tenebroso is a word that some of you may not be as familiar with. If you've taken my survey class, the Art History 2, you would know it. But it's an Italian word. It means shadowy. And it is applied to paintings which are primarily dark, and then there's a light shining in them. And the light could be from a fireplace, from a candle, from a window, or sometimes even just the light of the figure. And here you see that the Christ child almost seems to emanate light. There is a candle in the room, but the Christ child seems to be the source of light, which makes perfect sense, a religious form. Tenebroso was becoming a very, very important technique. Caravaggio is famous for popularizing it, for using it in many, many, many of his pictures, but as the date here and some other pictures show, he didn't invent it. It was already in use.